All right, I'd like to call the Village of Cottage Grove Village Board of Trustees meeting to order. This is our 2024 budget workshop. We are holding this in the Village Hall as well as on Zoom, and it is Monday, November 13th at 5:31 on my watch. We have a quorum. The agenda was properly posted, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next, then, we have public appearances. This is public's opportunity to speak on any subject. If you are from the public, we just wish that you share your name, your address, your municipality, and hold your comments to no more than 3 minutes in case we have a number of people who would like to speak. And we'll have that for the public record. With that, we do have wish to speak forms. We have 3 of them. One from Emily Crutchen, a village resident. Emily is in support of the library project and emphasizing the importance of public service in our growing community. Did not wish to speak, but definitely wish to share her thoughts. Also, we have Heather Beck, or Bike. Again, doesn't wish to speak, a village resident, in support of the library board, as well as continuing to have the library programming funneled through the library board. And then finally, again, filling out the form, David Beck, again, village resident, again, supporting library funding, did not wish to speak. Same as, I'm assuming, their partner with the same last name before, in support of the library board, as well as the library programming reporting up through the library board. Anyone else on Zoom or in the room wish to speak? If you do, just raise your hand. Okay. Then we will move on to new business. This is to discuss and consider our 2024 preliminary budget as recommended from the Budget Review Committee. They met back on the 30th of October. And again, select the date for the public hearing for adoption of the 2024 budget. So with that, I think we hand this over to Cameron to start us.
Thank you.
I'll start first, and then Cameron can speak for the next hour. So thanks, John, for the introduction. We're just a couple steps away now from completing the budget process that more or less started in August and September. In the intro memo, you can see the recommendations of the main changes made by the Budget Review Committee, which were reducing funding for the Crawford Platte project and the West Lawn Drive project. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but those reductions in costs were related to a decision to not install sidewalk for those projects. There is no sidewalk in those existing neighborhoods. So adding sidewalk would be a change. And then the other change was addition of funding for library programming. The next portion here is really just the outline of our table of contents of what the order of operations to go through our budget presentation. And then some of our budget notes. So the village's fair market value, also known as equalized value of all property in the village, increased this last year by about 23%, $236 million. Of that, once you take the tax increment districts out, which is what our taxes are based on, there was a $9 million increase, which is still a fairly healthy increase, but that equates to about 1%. The average village home at the moment is $315,000. that is at 81% of market. So you can see how I outlined there what the requirement of the law is to maintain between 90% and 110% of fair market value. Once you fall out of that range, we have a five-year window to correct it. Given the way the market is moving, we'll likely continue to dip. That 81% will be 75 or 70% the following year, so we should look to correct that as soon as possible, which we will be recommending to take place in '25, which will bring values back to 100%, and we will certainly make sure to communicate well with everyone on what that means. So if, for instance, it ends up being a 19% average increase for residents in their assessment, that does not equal a 19% increase. Actually, if you're average, then you'll likely have no change to your tax impact. It would only be if you're above the average or below the average that there would be a change. The village's tax levy for this current year is just over $5 million. Through the financial management plan process, there was a draft levy of about $5.7 million. That would equate to about a $261 increase for the average home. That was kind of the max that the board was comfortable with, at least at that point in the process, for direction for staff. Individual departments and committees then went through their process and made their individual recommendations to Cameron and I. When we compiled all of that, it came out to a $356 increase for the average home. Cameron and I looked through things and made adjustments, cut that down to $144 for the average home, which is about a 7% increase. As a reminder for context, generally the village has experienced 100 would be on the high end of taxes over the last 5 years. It's generally been somewhere between, Cameron, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it was between 50 and 100, somewhere around there, over the last 5 years.
For the average, yes, it's approximately between 90 and 101 over the last 5 years for year-over-year increase.
And then the Budget Review Committee, with their adjustment to the with the library programming there, that increased the 144 to 152, and actually given some updates to our valuation, in particular to manufacturing, which comes in later in the year. Cameron has some good news to share on that number, which just took place in the last few days here.
Yeah, as Matt kind of mentioned, one of the last things we get is the assessment roll for manufacturing. That's done 100% done at the state. I am pleased to report that increased our assessment ratio from mid 80% or rounded up to 81 to 81.6%. So that takes that $152 increase on the average tax bill down to $127.39. So happy that we got some favorable news in the last couple of days. The public hearing packet will have those notes adjusted. As Matt kind of mentioned, we did do one kind of unique change from in the past. We kind of converted our trash into a user fee, similar to what you see in recycling. So that is an additional impact on top of the $127.39. Back to you, Matt.
Cameron, did that change adjust the? So we try to provide some context. So every $10,000 in our tax levy equates to about $4 for the average home, $4.12. More specifically, did that change at all, Cameron?
So yep, you're looking at approximately $4.07
Okay.
per 10,000.
And so for tonight, what the board's action would do is establish a preliminary budget that we then publish. And that is published in a Class 2 notice ahead of the public hearing that's scheduled for December 4th. You know, we would have draft budget on the website and at Village Hall for people to come and review and ask questions and provide comment. And we'll have a formal hearing at the meeting and then adoption thereafter.
Yep, and kind of reemphasize what Matt said, we were expecting to have that in the paper on November 17th. Also per statutes, we'll have a physical copy here at Village Hall if residents are curious to come in and review. Kind of next, similar to last year, what was presented, just kind of an overview on things that are important overall to the village's fiscal health, general fund reserves, kind of growth, infrastructure. The village has done a good job over the last several years of adjusting infrastructure and making sure that we're keeping up and maintaining our roads, sidewalks, and trails. As a kind of reminder, Wisconsin CPIU, or really the metric that we use to determine kind of what inflation is for the village specifically, is about 5.6%. That is, you know, inflation typically hits governments a little bit slower than the rest of the economy. So while inflation rates may be going down a little bit for everybody else, we're still on the little higher mark. And similarly, if inflation would be going back up at some point in time, we would just be slightly delayed on that pattern. You know, kind of overall highlights, you know, we break down the way expenditures are reported into kind of major classes: general government, public safety, public works, conservation and development. Those classes were determined or made just so there's comparability between both financial statements and budget on various different communities. So the largest change that's you know, on the general government budget category largely resulted in the beginning of 2023 a restructuring of positions. So we're required to allocate positions to the accounts that most likely identify what the actual day-to-day responsibilities. So JJ stopped doing his public works director duties early in 2023 and went purely into director of administrative services / deputy administrator. Similarly, we changed our communication manager position over to a human resource manager position. Lastly, in the proposed budget, we are recommending the hiring of a deputy clerk. As general government is one of the smaller categories in our budget, any change to that, you may see a larger increase as a percentage compared to other departments. Public safety, our largest bucket of expenditures, that consists of our police, fire, EMS. This is a category where we saw the biggest increase from last year, both from a dollar percentage and similarly relatively close to a percentage, mostly driven by negotiation of expiring union agreement. You know, fire and EMS costs are still going kind of higher than our traditional cost from a percentage basis, and I just wanted to note that is not inconsistent with other municipalities in the state. So other municipalities are also seeing, you know, fire, EMS, and police go at a higher rate than kind of the rest of the government. Public Works and Culture, Rec, and Education are the two departments that we have that are most affected by inflation. That's a result of, you know, needing to buy things such as salts, playground equipment, maintenance items, the cost for services and supplies to be able to maintain operations is most directly corresponding with inflation. After the 2024 borrowing was reduced as a part of a reduction in the scope of the Crawford Plat and the West Lawn, the borrowing now is $5,420,000, which would result in a 42.23% of the village's debt limit. Of that amount, approximately $121,500 would be funded by water and sewer. That borrowing, along with the 2025 borrowing, puts us well within the $4 to $6 million range as identified in the capital prioritization process. Just a high-level recap of ARPA. A majority of the $747,000 of American Rescue Funds was appropriated and spent in 2023. It is estimated about $668,812 will be spent by the end of the year. So the proposed budget has an additional 5 projects that will exhaust the remaining funding. Those are kind of outlined in more detail in each memo, but also described briefly in the following 5 budget points. And with that said, I will pass it over to Deer Grove EMS.
I'll sit here this time. Make sure the microphone works. As discussed at the original budget committee meeting, our submitted budget allows for the increase of full-time staff by 2. Our increase in budget not only reflects some of the increases that we saw throughout all of operations, but to account for the increase in staffing levels by 2 more paramedics. The additional 2 more paramedics full-time paramedics will put us at 14 of the 16 needed to have 2 completely full-time ambulances. The goal of our budget that we submitted for 2024 is to not only have the 14 full-time staff, but we have enough casual staff hours to, as long as the stars align and their availability meets our need, have 2 full-time ambulances 24/7. We saw some decreases in expenses due to some of the volunteer staffing and other items that we evaluated and we decreased where we felt we could. We saw some minor increases in fleet maintenance, largely because 2 of our 3 ambulances are aging, and we've come to find that as they get to near 200 or 120 or more miles, they need more maintenance, so we've tried to plan for those. We have a planned vehicle replacement in 2025, as it was identified with a previous resolution. So there was some funds as a capital expense in 2024. We were able to use our annual audit to find that we had unassigned funds that would be able to offset the allocation for the 2024 capital purchase by $100,000, making for a $30,000 allocation to the capital purchase in the 24 budget. I think that's a pretty good overview. I'd be open to any questions if anybody had them.
I don't have any questions for you, and it doesn't look like you have any other questions here at the board level. I will say, kind of just a reminder that we will go through all the memos in the totality. At that point in time, we'll have discussion on whether or not there'll be additions or subtractions to the recommended budget amount. As the village looks at it, the EMS does their own kind of budget process, submits it to it. After I get that information, I take it and I fund it as recommended or best practice to ensure we get our biggest bang for our buck and how we fund the service. So we're looking at a $607,000 total all in needed to fund the current service for 2024, which represents about a $65,000 increase. I did just note that because of the use of fund balance, our allocation is being reduced by approximately $56,040. So there is a second component, though, to the ambulance. This isn't everything that's needed. So next year, the second piece of this purchase will be needed to be made. Do you have remember the dollar amount for that, the total?
Absolutely. It came in at $280,000, so we did $130,000 this year and $150,000 next year. And of course, we get audited annually. So we may have the opportunity to investigate what happens with the future, but based off of assuming that there will not be additional unassigned funds, the ask would be $150,000 total, and then that would be allocated out by your percentage.
And we would hope to have that updates to you as that information becomes available.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, I worked pretty closely with Cam on this, and he was immensely helpful and deserves a lot of props for I'm assuming the large amounts of stress he goes through creating this.
Thank you, Chief. All right. Next up, we have the fire department. Nick, are you available to present your budget?
Yeah, so, I kind of restructured the way it was laid out, just so it matched the way the town uses all their expenses. So it looks different than past years, but it's kind of, many of the items are the same. There's a few increases on there. Um, any increases that I had or changes, I attached a explanation sheet as to what they were changed for. Um, the big items on this year, the squad replacement that's coming in July. The contract was signed back in 2020, I believe, or 2021. The truck is due to arrive in July, so payment would need to be made for that on delivery. Um, the other items are the pager replacement that Cameron kind of briefly discussed. All of our pagers have gotten to an age that they're starting to fail, and the cost to repair them is almost as much as it is to just replace them. So rather than continuously repairing them, we're just gonna hopefully replace all of them and avoid that. Um, most of the items are pretty straightforward, and I don't know if anybody has any questions on any of it.
A couple comments that I'm just going to add. So for 2024, it's under a new contract. So as you can see, the overall operating increase is only 11,598,000. But as part of the contract, we are now covering the operating cost of the equipment that had historically been just used for town, more of a holistic approach that running it as a true fire department. So as I said, 11,598. We are seeing a combination of our equalized value increase as long as that additional piece of the pie, an operating increase of 31,540. So an all-in request for support of the fire department of $610,544. Any questions directly to Nick? Hearing none, I'll move on. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Cindy, we got Cindy and Tracy up next.
All right, well, thank you for letting us present our operational budget and capital budget to you tonight. If you flip through the 5 pages of library, at the end you'll find the budget recommendation from the Budget Review Committee, which we feel is sufficient for a number of our requests. And we do also want to acknowledge that we realize that there's no mid-year ask in 2024. So I'll just go through the budget that we submitted in September. So this includes a library outreach and programming specialist, part-time for 20 hours a week, as well as 10 hours or less a month in administrative support to the library board. We have a number in there for library programming, requesting funds for event supplies and some of our fees that we accumulate when we do all of our programming. So this is keeps us on track for 75 to 80 programs, which is on par with what we did this year with our kind of escalation in the latter half. This also includes random operational expenses for memberships, professional staff development, marketing, that kind of thing. We are happy to rehash all of our accomplishments over the last year. We can certainly pull up that PowerPoint, but we felt that we will just pass that off, and if you do have questions, we're happy to obviously talk about what types of programming we're thinking about. We have an additional line in there for extra diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and belonging in community events that we'd like to put on. We have an MOU with McFarland to provide additional library services in Cottage Grove. And then our capital request was for a story walk, which you'll find an additional memo after this budget request that outlines what a story walk is and where it would go. And a little bit about the benefits of that.
Yep, so I do have in the packet, Cindy kindly put together kind of a explanation of what Story Walk is. It is done at several other communities. Wanakee is probably the closest, Fort Atkinson. So in your packet, you have a little bit more of a detailed description along with what has already been discussed at the Parks and Rec Committee and also at the Library Board meeting as kind of working in conjunction. So also presented at the Budget Review Committee, kind of just rehashed the last year and the process that we've kind of gone through to establishing the initial budget or funding request of the $15,750 plus the $15,000 of Story Walk. As it was discussed at the Budget Review Committee, recommended funding the $34,165 under option 1. As a reminder, option 1 is to continuing to fund the library program under the library board in lieu of running it under option 2, the Parks and Rec Department. Hold off, or I will pass it for any questions. As a reminder, this is not the time to talk about either additional funding or any recommended cuts. We'll wait that till the end.
Can we just discuss the pluses and minuses of each one of these things?
Certainly.
without-
Of option 1 and option 2? Or
Yeah, I mean, I'm
of
sure there's
everything?
advantages to each and disadvantages to each, right? I'd just like to understand what those are.
Sure,
So I'll give you guys the floor.
sure. So I think, we strongly will agree with option 1, that library programming should be run under the direction of a library board. And for, I guess, a couple of different reasons. So one, we've spent, this entire year really kind of developing this program, marketing this program and getting it out into the community. And we've had pretty good successes with that. And I think that rebranding it as community engagement or moving it to a different department could, influence, I think, some of the outcomes that we have at the programming. I think it would be, moving it to Parks and Rec really is going to limit us in what we can do in terms of library. And that includes the people that are going to work with us, the funding that's going to be available, our volunteer base. I don't know, Tracy, if you want to add anything. I think to me, those are the big core reasons why it should stay with the library board.
I think we obviously know Parks and Rec is a well-established and incredibly competent department, and they do what they specialize in, and the library board specializes in community enrichment, literacy programs, adult education, youth education. So what we do is very different, and I think we both do it very well with the direction of our direct boards and volunteers.
So as what was, one of the things that was kind of discussed at the last meeting was regardless of option 1 or option 2, the funding level wouldn't change. So regardless of what was overseen, if the option 2 was presented as a pro, the thought was that there'd be a little bit less of the kind of administration side of things instead of having 2 separate processes, following it under 1 and then having the library board focus more on long-term strategic kind of plans. Again, we just wanted to come back to this body with to present the 2 different options so there could be additional conversations.
I guess I'm curious, why would people not want to work with, and I'm saying it differently, and I'm not meaning to sound pejorative.
And I'm sorry if I made it seem that way too.
No.
I think that we have established relationships with other libraries and other librarians and librarians who live in the community as well. And they work with us specifically because we are a library with a mission and vision and a library programming statements that is exactly what Tracy said and all of the things that our library programming encompasses. I think, other libraries can't provide library services under the state statutes to like a Parks and Rec. And so our contract with McFarland would no longer exist if it went to went to Parks and Rec.
So the input, what are the, I guess, quantifiable kind of impacts? You know, like that was one, right?
Right.
But kind of like, aside from we think that people won't work with us, or we'll get less volunteers maybe, or things, that's kind of hard to imagine.
We've talked with 3 of our librarian contractors who have done 3 or more programs with us because we can argue they're having a real impact in providing a real service. And all 3 felt really strongly that it needed to be library programming run under the library board. Again, because our mission and vision align with kind of the code of ethics of being a librarian.
Sure. I guess I haven't made a decision on which way I'm leaning here, but how many people are on the library board?
There are 7, including Dave, obviously.
So 7 people, and this is where my kind of analytical brain comes into play, is 7 people to manage a $50,000 budget and a part-time employee seems kind of like overkill if I'm just.
But I think you need to keep in mind that 12 months ago, we were in a very different place. And I think the next 12 months will be in a different place as well, because we've now worked with the public, we've worked with the Friends of the Library, we're starting to work with the Dane County Library System, the South Central Library System. Like, we're looking at alternatives, alternative spaces, alternative plans. Like, it's a new world, right, in terms of where we can go now. We know that we can't build, you know, a $35 million library. So what can we do, right? And we're willing to entertain all kinds of options. We can't do that without the library board. As it's written in the packet, right, option 2 says, well, the library board can still exist, but under long-term strategic plan. I push back on, I mean, to me, option 1 is JJ does it. Option 2 is Sean does it. Like, left pocket, right pocket. It doesn't really, you know, I personally push back on the fact that it's gonna reduce time and work.
Just to be clear, David, neither option has JJ doing
Correct,
anything.
sorry, you're absolutely right. Option 1
And
is.
option 2 would be
Right.
whomever, it would be Tracy still doing it.
Right, but I mean, Tracy still does all the work at the end of the day, so I
Right.
think that, like, and we've worked, since it last came before this board, we've talked as a library board, as Tracy and Cindy and I, we've reduced the staff time to as low as we can get it. I mean, we can continue to work to try to find cuts, but I just, finding I don't see any reason why we have to have, option 2 isn't really an option. I think we'll continue, we're pivoting, we're changing, and I think option 1 is really the only option worth entertaining here.
Well, we have a whole document from July that outlines all of the things the library board would like to work on in the future. And it's not, the library board is not just about managing Tracy and programming. And that was obviously a big thing that we did this year, but we also did the master planning study, and we're switching hopefully to strategic planning and revising long-term goals and working on additional funding mechanisms. Those are independent of managing an employee.
I guess I would be interested in, at some point, is just like every good startup has to have an exit strategy, right? Is that what happens, the library, you know, in a decade or whenever it's feasible, is that surely the programming then gets run through an operational kind of arm, and the library board exists to do what exactly? After, you know, when we get to a point.
So library boards,
always exists.
yeah, the library boards exist to
Right.
manage everything.
Yeah, the library
land,
board-
The capital, the
It's just like-
operational,
right.
the management of staff. That's what the library board oversees, just like the village board oversees all the other departments.
Right.
So I think I'd like to just take a step back here on what option 2 is, just because I think we're going on a different path. As Tracy and Cindy has mentioned, a library board has a significant amount of power. They're basically another operating entity under the village, very similar to the utility commission. They basically have sole authority. Once they have funding, they have sole authority on making decisions on how that money is spending and what they're doing it for it. The reason why option 2 was presented as such was to hopefully take not only administration burden off the library board to manage an employee, it was presented to potentially offer a path of growth on making that position eventually full-time, and potentially in the future, allowing more and more activities. Now, that is a strong assumption that Tracy would stay and continue to do the library program under both options. So that those kind of things have not been factored into either one of these options. But that is why, because it doesn't matter if you run a $2 million operating budget or a $50,000. If you have a library board, you have to follow that structure.
That helps, thank you.
And I'll just, at the Budget Review Committee, we talked about the two different options. And one of the reasons that I was thinking about option one, right, make sure I'm speaking to the right one, was just because I think trying to fit this into the Parks and Rec Department in the next 6 weeks just is too big of a lift. And if we really want to consider what this would look like in the Parks and Rec Department, I think we should take next year to plan it out, really see the pros and cons, really dig into it, and by this time next year, we would really be able to speak to, is this what's best for the village or not, so.
Any other questions, comments for Tracy or Cindy? Thank you, guys. All right, next up is administration. So that would be Matt.
Thank you, and I'll turn it over to JJ here in a moment too to summarize the what's going on with the university project. So there's a handful of items here. Social media archiving is the only one that lands on the tax levy. The social media archiving is needed to, as we expand our social media reach, to be able to maintain those records for when there are public records requests. And that's something that, right now is kind of we're not entirely sure how a response would occur, and some of the law might be a little bit behind on how that would play out, but many municipalities are moving towards some kind of archiving system. So I think it's worthwhile to give that a try here this year. The university project is a partnership with UW on various projects that and initiatives that are being researched within the village. It's a 3-year program, and this is year 2 of the 3-year program, $10,000 each year. I'll jump back to you, JJ, in a second. He can kind of outline where that's at so far. This previous year, we brought on some public relations consulting, and we'd like to continue that this year with a specific project of establishing an external communications plan, which would end up coming to the board for approval to determine strategically how should we be communicating externally with the public and other people. And then recruitment services, we'll see for the most part, most positions, Inga, our new HR manager, will be fully doing the recruitment for, but for department head positions and some management level staff, this would provide for us to continue for potentially filling 2 to 3 positions per year, utilizing GovHR, which is our HR consulting firm, to give Inga some resources to primarily for outreach during that process. So if we end up not needing to fill 2 to 3 positions, then we, of course, would not spend this money. And we would, right now it's planned to go as ARPA funding, so Cameron would be coming to the board with a different path for that money later in 2024 if we do not have open positions. So with that, I'll turn over to JJ for an update on university.
I'll try and be fairly brief. We got a lot going on with the group right now. 4 projects currently underway. The Bark Park was the first one with a couple of students and their mentor from landscape architecture that brought concepts to Sean, Aaron, and I to take a look at, and we're still waiting to kind of put a bow on the end of that project after we talked to some engineers and gave them some homework to do. Currently, a team of engineering students working on a revisioning of BB and what that corridor could look like in the future. A senior capstone project, which is designing an update to Houston Park and also incorporating connectivity between all of our parks in the village. That one, they work really independently, so I don't know. Sean and I are kind of waiting on what she's working on, but it could be exciting. And one that's recently grown, we had a senior capstone project that was going to work on an implementation plan for bike-friendly status for the village. She's now, I think, gotten it approved with the professor to work with me to complete our bike ped comp plan, get it through the approval process, and then work completely through an implementation plan, and then stay on in the spring semester and assist with an application to the league for bike-friendly status for the village, hopefully in time for early next summer, and actually see something through all the way to the end. We also have we have our first meeting tomorrow with Inga and I are gonna meet with a new team that's gonna work on a public art strategy, as well as they are still working, thinking they're gonna have a group for the spring semester to update the resident and business survey that can guide a lot of the comp plan update work. So yeah, so far I've been really pleasantly surprised with the value we've gotten in this first year.
And I would echo that. I mean, certainly it's JJ's time, and depending on the department, he might pull in some other staff here or there. But for what we're seeing so far, you know, I'd imagine it would be many multiples above this if you were, you know, hiring a private, you know, consultant and things like that. And the grad students have been really good, and hopefully that continues into, you know, through implementation. But, you know, even if it gets to a spot and you know, we need to hand it off to a professional firm, the quality of work is enough that, you know, they wouldn't have to start over. So I think we have a lot of these projects in a good spot.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, JJ. Any questions for administration? Excellent. We'll move on to a memo from the clerk.
All right, so my memo has a full-time deputy clerk. A lot of this is driven by the second polling location that will be coming on in 2024, but there are certainly other needs that this position will be helping us out with, as far as job responsibilities of attending meetings and minutes and agendas and general traffic in Village Hall. So that will be really helpful with the presidential election cycle in 2024, with 4 elections potentially next year. The next item is an increase for the crossing guards. As you all are aware, we're a little short, although I'm happy to report that we hired a new person last week, and they will be helping out at the lighted intersection on Main Street and Cottage Grove Road. So that's great, but their wage has not been increased for several years, and so we're hoping that with this increase that we will maybe recruit some more potential candidates for those positions. And then the next item is an increased wage for poll workers. Again, this one hasn't been increased for a very long time and is considerably low for our comparables. And with the need of the second polling location and trying to recruit extra people, we were looking at that wage. We will be taking out the meals that we provide just because it will be logistically a little bit difficult with 2 polling locations. And so that kind of offset the increase in the wage. And what we're proposing is comparable, because I have received feedback from other people that work in other communities that we were extremely low, so they would kind of pass on ours. So I'm hoping I can recruit them back to their own community and become poll workers in 2024. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Lisa, how much were the meals typically?
Well, it varied. It would, ballparking it without looking at the financials, anywhere from probably 140 to 175 an election. Although I think that price probably would be increased substantially in 2024 just because of inflation and what things are.
So you're probably roughly looking at $1,000 at $250 a poll cycle for the 4 major elections that we have.
Oh, per year or per election?
Per year. So since we don't have the same amount of elections each year, next
Right.
year would be the 250 times 4
Oh, okay.
to get to the 1,000.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the clerk budget? Do you just want to point out here, so of the total position, 72,000 is recommended to be funded in the general fund. Obviously, this body does not make any decisions on the water and sewer portion of the budget. So that's why while it was included in the total fiscal impact, it was not considered in the table below.
I do have one question, and it goes back to going back one step here, the social media archiving. Is what is that? So let's just say the village posts something on their Facebook page about the missing middle, and there's some mean comments that come on there, and a rogue clerk at the village hall decides they're going to delete a message on there because it was mean.
I'd be sending the clerk to the HR department because that would be.
Well, let's just say. Does that does the archiving software archive the original and then after the original? So they're both, our comments or interactions archived every time something is.
Inga might be able to answer this because she has experience with this at her previous employer, but my guess is that the action of the post and the action of the deletion would be captured.
Yes, so the original post is captured, and then any edits that are made also are captured. So then if a commenter comments and then they go back in and edit it, those edits are captured as well.
And how many social media pages does the village run today?
So Facebook primarily, there is, I think, an Instagram out there as well as a LinkedIn page. Now that we are at full staffing, I think there's some consideration on getting back up to full speed.
We have 6 currently. The most recent training I heard is that we should focus on our Instagram and Facebook. The other ones that have been inactive have now been deleted permanently, but 6 currently being archived.
Does that include the library board's page?
Yep.
And is that a per page license? Like is it like $1,000 per page or $750 a page or something?
I think the base licensing includes 10 accounts.
Okay. Thank you.
I do want to put out, this was approved in the 2023 budget. When we had some turnover, we didn't have somebody in to effectively implement the software. So now that we, again, are full staffing, bringing it back to this budget for passing for our open record request. Any other questions on Archive Social? Excellent. I'll pass it back over to JJ to discuss facilities and administrative services.
The first 2 items here are essentially the senior outreach with the Colonial Club. It's not actually an increase, and correct me if I'm wrong, Cameron, but I believe they just did not make us aware that it was going up this year. So
Correct.
We're properly allocating for '24. The emergency services building, camera and security, we've discussed here at the village board a couple of times. And the remaining piece of this memo is essentially capturing the reality that we have to make our existing facilities work for our staff with the growth we've seen. So there's a number of items in here to configure the spaces we have, hopefully to work for the staffing needs for the next 10, 15, 20-plus years. Includes a reconfiguration here at Village Hall, digitizing a lot of the files here at Village Hall that will free up space, replacing the roof and the exterior stucco on this building, HVAC replacements. The addition of a generator is largely the result of our internal election audit we did last year when there was a slight weather scare, and afterwards we debriefed and talked through what we would do should we lose power here at Village Hall during an election. And we came to the conclusion that adding a generator is the best solution. Security upgrades to the entrances and the service counter, parking lot replacement, which will include an additional access out on Willow Run. Then over at the Municipal Services Building, the big item here is essentially in the back of the lot, if you haven't been there, is loading docks and really steep old concrete stairs of the now programming spaces that Parks and Rec has done really well in utilizing those spaces. But we have to bring people in through the offices. So the asphalt failing, and we essentially asked Strand to give us a real high-level ballpark on what it would cost to fill that in and make those ground-level entrances and eliminate those loading docks. Again, there's an awful lot of HVAC equipment in need of replacement or repair. The rec spaces, while Sean and Tristan team have done a great job, they are essentially just concrete boxes. So we're hoping to look at what could be done in those spaces to better utilize them in the long term. Office reconfiguration, some door replacements and security upgrades, and then some improvements to the health and wellness space that we have back there. The Bonnie Road Public Works Shop immediately needs mold remediation in the office space. And then we did get proposals for roof repair and replacement options. There is a repair that is essentially putting a new roof over the existing structure, and according to the proposal, should buy us 15 years, which would be the preferred option on that roof. And then replacement of that parking lot. Of note, and it is in here, yep, that we did actually get noted for the failing asphalt as a violation of our DOT inspection of the salt shed. Essentially, it's so porous that the salt can just run right into the ground because the asphalt's so shot. And then after the mold's remediated, we're hoping in '25 to eliminate the office space and essentially open up some more space for storage. And I'll take any questions on that. I know that was a lot.
Thanks, JJ. I just want to point out just a couple of things before we open the floor. As JJ mentioned with the senior outreach, we finally got a good communication with them. The 28,000 is not an increase. That 35,000, as JJ mentioned, was from that kind of later request from the Joint Fire District. We were able to make that fit into the overall budget, utilizing our ARPA funds or what remains. So a reminder, everything on here except for senior outreach is capital or what's considered capital outlay, which would subsequently be borrowed for. So at that time, I'll open the door for some questions.
JJ, I'm on page, I don't have page numbers, but the parking lot replacement for the Bonnie Road. So we got a violation, but the replacement isn't due till 2025, so.
It's, in case DOT happens to watch, it's not that it's not important, but it's not a serious ding. There's no immediate remediation required. It's just the first time we've ever had anything noted on our salt inspection,
So
salt shed
no
inspection.
fines or any
No.
slap on the wrist, okay.
And I think when you're reviewing this, you're going to look at, on this, we had replacement on the roof for all three buildings. We're kind of looking at some economic of scale. So I wouldn't want to, or I wouldn't recommend, if you would go the route of replacing that for 50,000, I would look to get estimates to replace every parking lot to make sure we can get the most economic of scale in our contract.
And JJ, one other question too, like, I do know in this memo, I can't count them all, but there's a handful of these for 2025. Have we done that in the past budget workshops? I'm just trying to understand the implication of having this in here.
So the initial budget, before the budget review committee made some cuts to the sidewalk, we were well over our tentative $6 million annual borrowing. So we looked for things that needed to get done in 2024. And then the things that we listed are in 2025. While we didn't think they weren't important, we understood that they could hold off a year to do if needed. So with that said, with the reduction in the West Lawn and the Crawford plat, you could certainly add back any of the 2025 items without affecting the current year levy. Obviously, when you borrow for it, it comes onto the tax roll in 2025. But that's kind of where we ended up. JJ prepared this awesome memo that had everything and took several months to compile. I looked at it and said, no way we could fund everything in 1 year with what was given as the original parameters of the 500,000.
Okay, thank you.
On the health and wellness space, is there an opportunity, I guess, to give folks a stipend till, like a 24-hour fitness that's like $15 a month, and then perhaps leverage that space for the PD that needs a little more space?
I guess I'll take a stab at it if Chief wants to disagree with me. I don't think that would be super helpful to PD in even the near term. And it is, I'm not exactly sure of the process, but we've gotten an awful lot of nice equipment. I think PD's done a great job getting grants or donations or whatever it is. It's a really nice area full of exercise equipment. It's just, we haven't done anything to building to add. There are bathrooms there, but.
And I do want to put on record, we haven't paid for any of that equipment that's in that current space. It's either all been donated or a combination of donated slash us borrowing.
I mean, it's real. When you talk about employee retention and these kind of things, it's already a really nice space with equipment in there. It's just a cinder block area with some older kind of nasty bathrooms. So I just, eventually, if we really want to offer this to the employees, I think we're only a little bit away. Well, I mean, it's not insignificant, but a little bit away from making it a really nice space permanently.
I just want to go back to the Bonnie Road driveway for a moment. Making sure salt doesn't get into groundwater is extremely important, and if we can at all make this happen along with the other driveway projects in 24, I'd very much support that. So just wanted to add that in. Thank you.
And I agree. But it's not, the crew does a great job of keeping it off of there. I mean, we don't have salt sitting out there, but that was just I'm assuming that's the reason for the ding on the report.
Yeah, I appreciate all the diligence that goes into making sure salt goes where it needs to, so thank you.
I did take a note for discussion later to revisit potential adding the parking lots back. Any other questions on the
Yeah, Cameron, one last question too. When you had planted that seed about like roof repairs, there's 2 buildings in this budget that we want to get roof repairs. Have we, for these numbers, I mean, do we have quotes or bids for every one of these lines?
And this actually doesn't even include the wells. So there is 1 or 2 wells that we're planning on doing that were passed in the water and sewer budget. So these are just I think there's 3 roof replacements on here. I think isn't there 1 for Village Hall too?
Village Hall and Bonnie Road.
I see Village Hall, and then I see, was it Bonnie Road?
Oh,
MSB should be good.
MSB is good.
Yeah, Bonnie Road and the Village, but you said and then there's a well that or 2 wells that need new roofs? Okay. But when in terms of that economy scale, I wanted to ask that question. Have we done that, right? When we went and got quotes, we asked roofing contractor to do all 4 roofs? We did.
I'm not sure if we asked. Yeah, they gave us proposals for all of them. I don't know if we said, all right, sharpen your pencil if we order all of these. I don't know that we put that, and we didn't ask a second one yet. We're getting numbers.
You got a proposal enough for a budget, but you haven't got a full faith.
Yeah.
Hey, give me an estimate so I can sign for it tomorrow, kind of thing. So, okay.
I will say, not that it's included. The Utility Commission did ask us to investigate, aluminum roof. That there's a significant more expense to that. So, obviously, as we go forward, we can certainly come to the board with what the options were. Just know that's going to be 2 or 3 times more expensive than what the current option is.
Or
and
more.
on our current facility, kind of long-term, that may not be a great route to go. All right, we'll move on. Next up is Sean in Parks and Rec.
Excuse me, thank you, Cameron. Looking at the memo, first thing we were talking about is doing a little improvement, adding some turf services to our athletic fields mostly. As we get busier, they take more of a beating, and so we want to make sure that we're providing the safest and best athletic fields that we can. Parks maintenance position, we're looking to add a full-time person there. We've been very fortunate to add some really great amenities over the last several years, but now we kind of have to take care of them. And we have one full-time person in parks right now, and then our 90-plus acres is also helped out with 7 seasonals. So we're looking, that was a request that we had. ADA projects, that's a continuing thing. Typically, every year is $10,000. This year, we did not spend our $10,000. We kind of sat on that to make sure that the Bakken Park project did not go over. And by the time we got to that point where we knew that we were going to be in good shape there, we couldn't really do any improvements out there because it was a little cold for concrete. One thing, most of our playgrounds, with the exception of Community Park, we have wood chips in them. So that requires maintenance every 2 to 3 years. So we've asked for a $10,000 line item to just kind of keep up with that. Now, understand too that as we go through this process and we get farther into it, our intention is to make everything ADA accessible. So we would get away from wood chips, which they're a problem and they're not really very accessible. Houston Park, we wanted to do a playground replacement there and do some reconfiguration at Houston. So that was added. And then just some miscellaneous capital projects, scoreboard at Community Park, shed replacement, batting cage, mower, infield, groomer. Let's see, some Bakken security locks for our concession area. Adding some electrical to the Red Hawk Park that currently does not have electrical in that shelter, and it also gives us the opportunity to add the AED to Red Hawk Park. And then an athletic field painter, and as well as some pitching equipment, archery equipment, and just catcher equipment, just things that we need to continue running some of our programs. Cameron, do you want to talk about the engineering or me?
Yeah, so as we compiled kind of the all-in capital costs, one of the things we realized that was in the initial capital prioritization plan was Community Park scheduled for 2025. What would have happened is we would have needed to invest $100,000 in engineering the park, getting the plans ready. Ultimately, we thought it was best to push that back to 2026, meaning we won't have to incur any engineering costs until 2025. Even with the decreases in scope for the public works projects, we do still recommend pushing that project off to 2026 and engineering in 2025. And obviously, staff will continue to research on any potential grants and other funding that are available in the meantime. Parks are a little bit harder to get than bike trails and ped trails, but we'll get what we can get. Ultimately, the summation of all the requests, and we'll talk about this further when we discuss plus or minuses to the budget, but we did eliminate the parks maintenance position from what was requested, along with reduced what was asked for the increase in turf services by 2,000, and obviously eliminated the community park engineering at 100,000. Any questions on the budget memo?
Do you know the lifespan for a lot of that capital stuff?
Oh boy. So you're probably looking at 4 to 7 years, depending on what item that is.
The scoreboard replacement, 10 plus. The shed, 10 to 15. Batting cage, 10 to 15. Mower replacement, we've been doing that about every 5 years. Infield groomer, 10. Security locks forever, electrical forever, equipment, recreation equipment, 3 to 5 years, and an athletic field painter, 5 plus, easy.
So as you see, there's a difference between the useful life and how long Sean's gonna hold on to it, just because he's had to work with a much more tight budget. Yeah, and we did have discussions earlier this year about the 2016 wing mower replacement. We initially had ordered it, thought we would get it, were turned down, and then just recently one became available that we may get before the end of the year, if the budget is approved with it in it.
Is there, excuse me, is there any opportunity for like the scoreboard to get like an advertisement on it or anything like that? to
Yeah,
kinda-
we can absolutely look at that, you bet.
With respect to Houston Park, having had hundreds of softball practices out there myself, it's wet. Like, it hasn't rained in a week. And so when you have kids running around in there, it creates a lot of lumpy grass out there in the outfield and in the park behind the outfield. Really opportunities to hurt yourself and twist ankles and that type of thing. I guess my question is does was the remediation plan with Hydrite fulfilled, or should there be something we should be asking for or doing relative to the runoff, as opposed to just moving a piece of equipment to somewhere that's a little drier?
I don't think Hydrite necessarily has anything to do with that. That could be any business on that footprint there. And the runoff on their site is actually managed more than anywhere else because they have a stormwater containment system. I think, and I'll let Sean defer to me, I think the equipment might have been just placed in the wrong spot. And is that what we're talking about, is just the playground equipment being?
I think Vince is talking about the park
entire-
itself in general. Yeah, it is. And that's a park that we end up mowing twice a week just to try and stay ahead of it. But some of the runoff, yeah, it does come down that hill into the playground. We're looking at moving the playground and just kind of hopefully would be on the east side of the park. There isn't any curb, so anything that comes rolls off of Hydrite down the gravel road heads towards the playground. So we'd be looking to kind of narrow up that driveway and eliminate as much of that water getting to the playground area as possible. Now the rest of the park, yeah, it's just a wet park.
Cameron, I saw you sent out the stuff with the maintenance position. We're gonna talk about that part later.
Yep, we'll wait till
Okay.
we get through the public works, and then once we're done, we can kind of make a list of things to go back to and
Okay.
kind of discuss in totality.
All right, I'm glad that's on the list. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions on parks? All right, next is our police. Chief Gary.
Thank you. So putting this budget together, obviously having the personnel and having the equipment was a top priority. As you can see, requesting 2 additional officers for 2024 for operational and staffing purposes with the growth of the village, and calls for service, they're going to continue to increase. So just trying to plan appropriately and get the staff where we need to be. As you can see, we're a little out of sync with not only national levels, but Wisconsin and Dane County. So just trying to plan appropriately related to squads. You've heard me talk about our current squad situation and where we're at. So trying to get 2 squads in 2024. Hopefully it will get into a rotation basis. What I'd like to do is get into a 3-year rotation with the cars so we don't run into these issues in the future. But obviously, part of that also is controlled by the manufacturers themselves, which everybody is fighting with right now. And just this week, I reached out to Ford. They were supposed to be opening up the ordering process this month. And due to their recent employee matters that they just resolved, they've postponed that window opening until February of 2024. So that'll be the first chance I'll get to actually order cars. Modular vehicle barrier system, again, the village and the events and the community involvement that's here. We're trying to attract different things, and we want to keep those events safe as possible. The good old days of putting up a sawhorse that has a road closed sign on it, while it's still used, it's not as effective for some of the actions that are occurring out in this world in this day and age. So this actually is a 2-year project, getting barriers in '24 and then doing it again in '25 so that we can start hardening our events so that we don't have to worry about cars driving into places that are filled with people that have no true escape routes. The emergency management response bags, if you're unaware, our EOC is a joint EOC Emergency Operations Center at the ESB building down in the basement. The idea is to get a couple bags together that we can get out to the scenes should something happen, and have on scene control and command, and still that way we're not overtaxing the ESB building, because obviously that facility is going to have a lot of activities going on with the fire and EMS responding there. So it's trying to plan appropriately and putting command out at the scene. The village has flock camera systems in place right now. As it would be, as any businesses, they try to figure out the best way to market their product and keep you engaged with them. We have an opportunity to lock in a price for the next 5 years if we're planning out for futuristic additions of cameras. So the idea is, again, as the village is growing here, to add some cameras that have been very beneficial to us in detecting criminal activity, and also helping finding lost or missing people over the last year and years prior to that. So it's strategically getting those cameras out so that we get a little better coverage throughout the village. And then the last items, while it's listed as miscellaneous items, it's accounting for body armor for the officers, some additional handheld radios, obviously as we're adding officers, need them to get the right equipment, emergency entry tools and equipment. Again, should we need to get into a location without having to drive a squad through the front door, it's getting the right equipment to open up those doors when we need to. And that's a very quick and concise synopsis, so open to any questions.
I'm just gonna go up to the front or first page and provide a kind of some questions that have already been asked, just to rehash it though. The most common question by far I get is about new squads, and ultimately if it's difficult for us to get squads, is leasing an option? Unfortunately, leasing for the village with the current levy limit worksheet, while we can take an exemption for taking out debt for those vehicles, we cannot take that same exemption when we're entering into a lease obligation. So that's why we have to budget to capitally purchase each vehicle. The population number that is noted in here is a January 1, 2023 number of the 9,218. So note that this analysis had been done, we're budgeting for 1/1/2024, so a full calendar year of growth with that comparison. Lastly, kind of with the emergency management bags, if things come under budget on the ARPA perspective, I will likely come back to this board and ask that we use some remaining ARPA funds to purchase a second bag. Ultimately, the goal was to get 2 bags at the $7,500 a piece. So hoping that, I don't want to overcommit our ARPA funds because it is a fixed amount, but if there is, this is kind of that first priority that I have to get funded. I will now leave it. Oh, and a key component to this budget is understanding we haven't received our 2023 squad. So currently, Chief is working on what that would look like. I don't know. We were told we got a VIN number. I don't know if that now is pushed back. But essentially, what you're going to give authority as part of approval of this budget is to continue to move forward in the 2023 squad process, to order 2 cars in 2024 for 2024 and to also order a car to hopefully receive either late 24 or early 2025. So a total of 4 squads.
And we're hoping that they could do hybrid, but I understand we need equipment if we need equipment, but I feel like I heard that somewhere in the last meeting.
Yes, we're still trying to target for hybrids if at all possible.
Great, thank you.
They might be the only things that are available, so we'll keep this board updated.
I'm sorry to ask you this for at least the third time, but can you explain maintenance of effort again?
Excellent. So what Chris is referring to is Act 12 that established thresholds for maintaining public safety. The 3 things that would count for us is our fire department, EMS, and our police. So what it is we have to maintain our level of effort, or a combination, what has been preliminarily defined as full-time equivalents, overall operating budget, or overall makeup of the agency, so like certifications and accreditations. So right now, as preliminarily defined, as long as you hit one of those buckets, how they're going to decide for all 3, or I don't know if you're going to be able to pick and choose currently of all 3, is if you fail to meet that requirement, you can have up to a 15% decrease in your supplemental aid, which was the biggest portion of revenue increase from last year. So that is something that will need to be cognizant going forward budgeting. We are setting ourselves up very solidly with the way we've structured our union contract and hiring officers for next year to make sure that we won't potentially see a significant decrease. Because one of the things that if we wouldn't be able to maintain staffing, we're both potentially having an operating decrease or a full-time equivalent decrease, and then it will be very hard to justify that overall we have the same level of certification on the agency. So all this kind of was done in the budget process to hopefully maintain that level of effort. Hopefully that answered the question at a high level.
I can read it back. I mean, and you can test my Google skills here, but basically you have to maintain a level of law enforcement and fire and emergency medical services that are at least equivalent to the previous year.
Yep.
Is that really ultimately what you're saying?
Yep, and so DOR has been tasked to interpreting what that means. And so DOR has told us right now that the reporting is going to be potentially those 3 buckets. And we'll have to report out, not just for us, but for any of our joint ventures that we're part of. We are tied to their fate, fortunately and unfortunately. So if the district would choose for some reason to decrease staffing or to significantly change their operations, we could potentially be harmed overall, the way the current Act 12 is written.
But where it helps us is, it's likely that if our percentages change and ours goes down or someone else's goes down and ours goes up, that it'll be the collective that's viewed. But those are the kinds of things that Department of Revenue has to figure out how they're going to handle. But it's likely that it'll kind of cut both ways when it comes to the joint services we have.
I guess I would feel with inflation, granted we're in a weird place right now inflation-wise, but I feel like this one's an easy bar to meet, it feels like. So I guess
As long as you don't have staffing turnover. So you get a position where you have 3 open positions for significant, because it's not what's budgeted, it's what actual results are.
What you spent, right.
So that presents the biggest challenge. So especially if you're kind of the lowest on the market for the area, that puts you at a high level of risk.
Like you said, we set ourselves up for success in 24, but 25 is a different, 25 and every year after that's a different ballgame.
And kind of furthermore with Act 12, I know somewhat off topic, but important to understand, expenditure restraint is a new payment that the village has got this year to the tune of $93,000. So it's by no means nothing, and we hope to maintain that level of funding. And what will happen with Act 12 is we'll get that same exact payment in 2025, regardless of what we budget, but there is a formula for determining eligibility then in 2026. So part of the budget this year is to also set us up to make sure that our floor is higher so we can maintain expenditure restraint and keep that 100 to 125,000 in the future. Probably a topic for if we want to go into Act 12 a little bit deeper outside of this meeting.
Question on the cameras. Will it cost us the same to run 9 cameras as it does 4 cameras, software-wise? Or is there going to be a? So it's, the best way to put it, it's a flat fee of $2,500 a camera. So the issue is Flock has deemed that moving forward, they're not going to lock that price in future years. So
Okay.
the camera price could go up, let's say, $3,000 a camera.
Sure.
Even though we have had 25 per unit.
I guess what I'm asking, is there an associate, so I assume we use their software online to look at the cameras and.
It's all
included in
their stuff. We
So-
have nothing in-house that is
Right, so
ours.
do we pay a fee to them to use that software on top of the purchase, I guess is my question.
The fee is the $2,500.
Okay, just the purchase of the
Yep.
camera, gotcha. And then Cameron, my question for you is, and this is my first time doing this budget stuff with the village. So I'm gonna ask some really dumb questions, but there seems to be inconsistency within each, sometimes we have, what, this appears to be an increase, the 467, and in other departments, there appears to be the entire budget roll-up.
So how these memos are established is initially, in general, if there's about a $10,000 increase or a new kind of mini service. So like the reason why Archive Social was on there is we're going to implement a software that manages our social media posts, and we thought it was significant enough to mention while the dollar amount isn't, but 10,000 has kind of been our threshold to include on these memos for increases in either services or a cost. And then I've also asked departments to include any capital related items on here, which should be consistent with the capital prioritization process. It should have already been detailed out in there.
Okay.
We are working on making these more and more consistent year over year. So we're in year 2 of cleanup. So we'll obviously continue to look for either improvements or better ways to present this. Any other PD questions or specific memo questions?
Thank you.
All right, down to our last department for the evening, Public Works. I believe this will be JJ and John, or a combination of the two.
Perfect. Hi, John, in case nobody knows me. I was able to spend some time with Brian and kind of work on a lot of these different line items and kind of, so I'm privy to most of this stuff. So to start with, out of our capital was to replace some streetlights on North Main up by Limestone, which is similar to the same project we did this year in the Commerce Park, where we, kind of replaced some aging lights with some Alliant-owned lights. Next was our, out of the general fund, was some commercial driver's license. We are hoping always to hire staff with a commercial driver's license. If not, we kind of like this money to be able to train them, send them off to a class or a school to, to get that. Part of our capital is to replace some aging assets we have, one being our skid steer, replacement of a pickup truck, the replacement of our tool cat, and the purchase of a new piece of equipment, a mini loader. Next would be in our forestry, in our general fund, we're looking to purchase some new tools to better assist our staff in trimming our street trees, and basic supplies, and also to put some money away for contract services on some of these larger ash trees and some other trees that are just too large for us to safely do in-house. We need to kind of hire some of those things out. Cameron kind of mentioned, you know, we were affected like others with inflation, and one of the big things is in our roadway supply account, we, you know, gravels and signs and paint and things like that have gone up astronomically. So that roadway supply general fund kind of shows that the cost of some of the daily things that we need. Part of that increase was also to purchase a brine tank to have on site. Currently, we go to Dane County on Fish Hatchery Road, kind of load up a small tank, go around and do some anti-icing. We would like to be able to kind of store some brine in Cottage Grove, so if we have back-to-back storms or things, we can kind of get to it a little quicker. It's pretty inexpensive kind of way to just have some storage on site. Our future trucks will have the ability to spray brine on our salt, so this will just also give us the ability to have some surplus kind of there. I guess that's the basic summary of our kind of initial projects. We can kind of get into some major capital stuff. I don't know if you wanted to hint at some of that.
Before we get into the capital, let's just touch on a few things.
Sure.
I do want to remind this body, so we are budgeting overall $10,000 for CDL. Note the bonus incentive for coming on with your CDL is significantly less than actually sending that person to training. We've been very lucky to hire all of our public works technicians this year with CDLs, and that's been a large component. So on each of those, we've saved about $2,500. So this is kind of setting that money aside to ensure that we can at least offer that incentive, but if we can't offer it, we'll have to ultimately send those individuals to training. We do tie kind of a length of service, so if they don't last a full year, they have to pay back the full amount. They last a year, but in between the 2 years, they have to pay a half back if they leave, and then over 2 years, that incentive's fully earned. So we are being careful that we don't want somebody to come in, get the bonus, and walk out. There's some recapture there. The Utility Commission already approved their portion of the 2024 equipment purchases. Now,
one item of note too, sorry if I missed this, but John is serving as interim Public Works Director, so, commend him on catching up on this he was working obviously with Brian on this throughout, but to take it and present it when, he wasn't fully putting that together, I think is impressive, and hopefully he enjoys the interim process enough to want to consider applying and being part of the process. So that's.
I suppose I can take this next part, but we did already touch on this at the beginning of the meeting. The Crawford Plat reconstruction was essentially all the a la carte options were presented to the budget review, just given that this project for years just factored in asphalt replacement, but given the change in ordinance last year, related to responsibility for sidewalk to the adjacent property owners no longer being in our ordinance. We wanted to present all the options, but ultimately budget review decided to just replace the streets, and we'll move forward with making these pedestrian connections, maybe in smaller bites or in some other manner in the future. And then West Lawn Drive was essentially the annual repaving, is just one big street. Again, that had a small piece of sidewalk for consideration, but ultimately decided to take that out. Then, go ahead, you can take it.
I can get it. So kind of similar to Parks and Rec, there's a couple of projects that in the initial capital prioritization plan were scheduled for 2024. Ultimately, we pushed those projects to 2025. So what that will result in, though, is needing some funds for engineering. So 45,000 approximately for East Taylor, 90,000 for the bike extension. I will note at the Budget Review Committee, we were asked, backtracking, to make sure that the revised scope of these projects would be consistent with what was presented here. Kyla and Josh did confirm that that does fit within still the parameters, and that was about 5 days ago now. That she provided that estimate update. So ultimately, we get to a total fiscal impact of the 3.7. I do want to note, similar to the police, vehicle. We have still not received our 2023 plow truck. We will not receive that plow truck yet, but in 2023. So there are some carryover funds in sitting in 411 that's budgeted. Part of that equipment purchase is water and sewer, but the 168,000, that's general fund portion. 35 will be offset by selling the existing plow truck that we have, and the remainder is bond proceeds that we've already have on hand to pay for it once it comes. Any questions on Public Works?
Can you, I don't know what, I mean, I have a general idea, but I'm not an expert. What does a mini loader do that a skid steer can't, or a toolcat can't, or why do we need all three?
Sure. So, you know, coming here, and this started before I came here, but what I see here is, you know, we chip brush, you know, once a month, right? The big use of this mini loader, besides in the wintertime, is to help offset, you know, chipping brush is one of the most dangerous things we can do in the Public Works Department. You're behind this chipper, right? And we all know what a chipper can do to us, right? You're kind of stepping over a curb, you're in all these weird, awkward angles, right? What the mini loader will do, allow us to grab the brush, put it into a back of one of our patrol trucks, and take it to Purple Cow. Most of our brush, we're not gonna be able to get away from not chipping brush entirely, but this will help offset as we grow and as our canopy grows. These piles of brush, as you see as you drive around Cottage Grove, are already getting to be enormous, right? So we have to figure out ways to load this brush safely into a patrol truck. A skid steer, we can't reach into a patrol truck. We can barely reach in a patrol truck currently with a skid steer, and we can't push that down and pack it down in, where a mini loader will give us the ability to pack it in and get that much more brush into a patrol truck to get it down the road to Purple Cow. So that's the big purpose of the yearly use. Certainly it drives, you can go twice as fast in a mini loader, still under the speed limit obviously, than you can in a skid steer. In a skid steer, so you can get around the village so much quicker. You can, obviously there's turn signals and things like, so it's a road capable machine, but it allows us to kind of do things so much more efficiently and safer.
And this might be a topic for another day, but would that allow us in the future to be able to do brush more than once a month?
That is a topic for another day. John and I are just starting our relationship. Theoretically, it would help. Anything that helps. But yeah, I'd like to talk with John before I say it publicly.
It's more the manpower though, right, Jay? It's not necessarily the equipment, it's the manpower, I think.
But certainly having, you know, in a perfect world, we're driving around in 2 loaders and a couple larger pieces of patrol trucks than we currently have. We're loading brush, we're sending it down to Purple Cow. Certainly, it could be feasible to get through the city or the village so much quicker than we are currently. So there is that possibility, certainly.
JJ, I had a question on the bike path extension. And we've kind of talked about this in the past, but like there are grants available, right? But is it that can pay for, if not most, a good chunk, almost all of it, right? But we have to budget for the project, get a statement of work, right, or a proposal, and then the grant will pay for it, right? So we technically have to budget for it in order to move forward, right? So it's a kind of it's a chicken or the egg conversation, right? So like, is there, like, because especially for this one, I think there are like we can easily go find some grants and some funds for this, but we'd have to budget for it, you know. So like, how do we work through this, right?
So I'll take this because it's kind of more on the finance side. So what would happen in a situation like this where there is grant funding out there? We have to commit to the funds up front, and then ultimately anything that's funded with the grant funds can go back into now anything that was borrowed for Public Works or borrowed for parks has to go back into Public Works or parks, or some of the debt needs to be refunded. So ultimately we have to approve the full expenditure, not net of the grant proceeds. And then we can go back and reduce either future borrowings by the difference between what we can get for grant funding. There's a similar project I think JJ and I talked about, or a project that we talked about a week ago, about how to, now that we're potentially having some grant funding, what that formally looks like now that we have the capital prioritization plan. I think we decided ultimately we'd still come back to this board for a resolution, just to enhance that transparency. But that is coming in the near future.
So to read that back, like, can you, if you get a grant, can you use it to pay the entirety of the debt off on a given project, or is there, would there ever be a financial reason to pay a portion of it off or not pay any of it off and just use that towards future projects in terms of a grant?
Ultimately, we would defer to our bond counsel. There's very rare instances where, like, if we borrowed for a very specific piece of machine, that the bond rating agency might be like, hey, no, you should have spent that money on that, and figure it out from a grant perspective. But ultimately, what I would do is recommend either defeasing kind of future project costs. Public Works is super easy because there's always going to be a project around the corner. Ultimately, what I would maybe recommend on the park side is, what's the next priority? If we don't have an immediate priority, let's sync that right into ADA or something like pour and play or something like that to give back to the parks sooner rather than later.
It just, this particular one, like, continue from South and Greenwich to County Highway, it's like religiously the one that keeps coming up time and time again, because it would make it so much easier for little kiddos to get to school, right? Could ride their bikes, whereas they don't want to ride on the sidewalk or they don't want to ride in the bike lane. And so just trying to think of ways in which to, $500,000, that's not a small amount of money, but there are lots of grants in the wild there that we could make something happen.
There are. I will just say, now that, assuming we get through this process here and we've got a capital plan we can point to, a lot of that money was in biennial. It would have been nice if this was the process last year. I think it would have been a lot more opportunities for bike paths in particular. We may just start doing our homework and getting into it and coming back and saying, we're getting X amount, but we may have to push it back to the 26 or something like that. And a lot of those two, we've used park grants twice and a TAP grant once since I've been here, but a lot of the other funding, everybody's probably getting the same emails for the last few years. As a member of the MPO in Madison, we don't typically score very well, and they are the ones responsible for dishing out a lot of that federal funding. It was actually them scoring us low that allowed us to go to the state level and get the TAP grant for the piece through the park for the Glacial Drumlin Trail, because we didn't score very well in Madison's matrix, or the MPO's matrix. But, so anyway, that's just a long-winded, excited to start looking for it. It might just mean that they are a couple years out.
Okay. And that was part of the reason why these specific projects were pushed out. Now we have a runway to go after some of the stuff.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Any other public works? Okay, now we get to the fun part. So I'm going to show you two screens. I'm going to show the initial based off of what was best available information when this packet was available, but I do have an updated page. So this page was what was in your packet. Again, the two major things the major thing that changed was the assessed value. Like I had mentioned, the manufacturing was finalized. So that ended up decreasing what's called our mill rate. Did the page switch? Perfect. So that reduced our mill rate down to $7.09, or the average taxes on the assessed home of $315,000 of $127.39. As we kind of work our way down the page, you will see the combination of the capital and debt line stay very consistent year over year. It's just the way levy limits have forced us over time to slowly move what we've historically levied for capital into debt service. Furthermore, on this page is an analysis of what our debt will look like at the end of the year. So with the proposed debt in the current plan as is, we are looking at being about 42.23%. with a debt capacity of $35,872,000. Any questions on this page before we open up the floor to start talking about other things?
Cameron, does this new updated one include the budget review recommendations?
It does.
Okay.
So as you can see with the manufacturing, that helped a lot. And really that changed the assessment ratio, which plays a huge factor into the TID out assessment ratio. And since our TIDs are so large, they have a significant impact on that assessment ratio, obviously to the positive effect. I will just note the user fee, we've converted trash from a levy supported to user fee. That is not factored into that $127.39. So when we're talking about overall impact, it's a bigger number than just that 127.
Where did we talk about? We didn't talk about that, did we? We did. I must have missed that. Was a meeting I missed? Okay.
It was probably talked about a little bit more detailed in the financial management plan.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. So I have, if we're done talking about this page specifically, I have 2 items that I've noted from the packet to discuss. The first one is to consider, Heidi had mentioned just to consider potentially adding back the parking lot specific to the salt shed. I will go back to that memo and allow this board to have some discussion. Again, not to add more to the pie, if you would recommend adding back the parking lot specific to the salt shed, I would recommend doing all 3 parking lots.
This is a capital expense that we're talking about, right? So it would be part of all the other Project 2024 borrowing.
Yep, so there'd be a net levy effect in 2024 of 0. And then obviously as the repayment gets layered in, you would see the effect in subsequent years.
So is the consideration basically in that part of the memo, anything that says 2025, consider if we want it in 2024?
Yep, both specific to what was mentioned while we were going over the memos discussion on the parking lot replacements. Heidi had mentioned with the note from DOT that the leaking of the salt into the ground was a concern. And then I kind of followed with, if you're going to do that one parking lot, it probably makes sense to do Village Hall. The one positive about adding the parking lot to Village Hall, with the significant elections we have this year, having that cutout back in the back will allow traffic flow a little bit better here for the November election. That work would not be done before the April primary.
There was already going to be a new section at the Bonnie Road thing for branch drop off, right? Is there?
I believe that's done.
Yep.
It's done? Okay.
I guess, Gigi, I'm with Heidi here on the salt thing, but at the same point, you said that there shouldn't be any salt runoff. So I'm just trying to understand the problem statement.
Just more of a note that the asphalt there is so bad that their inspector noted it. Yeah, that whole, if you've dropped off anything, that whole parking lot, it's worse than this one or MSB or any of our streets, and it's bad. And it's not huge either.
Well, you've got a lot of heavy trucks going in and out of there too, right? Like, is asphalt really the proper thing to be putting in there? Just ripping that up all?
I would love some super thick reinforced concrete, but while we're talking about long-term, I'm still thinking 15 years from now, maybe that site's not the best spot. So asphalt should get me to retirement.
Somebody else's problem.
But I guess I haven't heard a definitive, right? Will salt leak into the ground with the way the current parking lot is built?
It will, and John, jump in anytime. It will 7-8 months, one winter cycle after the new asphalt is there will be a spot with a crack that until we get it sealed yes, I don't think this is a serious source of salt infiltration. That's a whole nother conversation we could have too with how we treat roads and everything else. It was more of just we've talked about this asphalt every year, here's a new piece of information for consideration. It's so bad, they noted it, when they're really just there to look at the salt shed and the apron in front.
The concern we see with salt storage areas is largely with surface runoff to surface waters in this region of the state. There isn't nearly the concern with runoff if it's infiltrating, even dissolved salt. And as long as they're managing it so that there's not runoff into a surface water, or there's not a direct connection with surface water, that is very unlikely to be an environmental concern, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially, I think, what I was asking. I mean, like, I'm with Cameron, right? Like, if you're gonna do this, you might as well, let's do all the parking lots, right, to get economies of scale. But at the same point, that's a lot of money, but then, and Heidi, I think I'm kind of guessing where you're going with this, so I'm kind of curious in your point, but like, just looking at this parking lot just at 50K, it's like, are we doing it because of infiltration, or are we doing this because we're concerned? Like, to me, I guess what I'm hearing is like, it's really not a concern. And to your point, Larry, you even made it even less of a concern, right? Because it's not like, there is an underlayment there, so it's not, the likelihood it's gonna end up in groundwater is like slim to none, right? Like, we're probably putting more salt on the roads, and that's ending up, there's a good chance that's ending up more in the waterways than what's in that parking lot.
Yeah, I think just to keep in mind that that specific area is well past its useful life as defined by like what that specific material can use. So that's why it, even with it not being like you had mentioned, a huge environmental concern, it is still recommended that that project be considered in 2025. I did add up the two parking lots that we were talking about, the 135 plus the 150. So if there would be a recommendation to move forward with corrections, it would be $185,000 in additional funding for the parking lots.
And Cameron, we took out how many millions when we decided not to do the sidewalks? Two at least, right?
2,025,000, I think, for one, and another 180,000. So basically, what we cut on the sidewalk for West Lawn would fund this.
Yeah.
Minus 5,000.
I mean, I think environmental reasons aside, I think we've all driven these parking lots and they need to be replaced. So I think it makes sense to include them in 2024's budget.
Excellent. So, I would, Chris?
I was just gonna say I'm kind of inclined to agree with that, especially if we have a brush drop off now too. It's gonna get more use, so kind of leaning that way as well.
With hearing that, when I summarize the motion, I will include this. Then for further discussion, we can have that as part of that motion. Second thing that was asked as part of the budget review committee, and Inga helped me point out that the dates on here weren't correct. These are 2024 dates. So this presents what the impact would be for the various implementation of parks maintenance full-time staff as of 10/1, 11/1, and 12/1 of 2024. Again, while the tax impact per 100,000 or per 10,000 is slightly less than that $4.12 on here, the general ballpark is that $9.11 for October 1, $6.39 for November 1, and $2.72 for December 1. My recommendation, just given where the current impact is plus the user fee, would to be exercise caution on adding any additional levy to 2024. This obviously is a position that is needed, and we just asked if it would not be added in the 2024 budget, it'd be a top priority position for 2025. So I'll open it up for discussion.
If somebody starts in December, how helpful are they at that point in the year? I'm just curious. Is it more helpful in October when it's warmer and they can still do some work?
Absolutely, it's more helpful, but we would be able to utilize somebody in December as well.
I guess I just want to point out that we have about 6.5 miles of paths that we plow in the winters, so that person would be would also be useful with maintaining those paths and sidewalks.
Because, John, your team focuses on the streets, right? And Parks and Rec is responsible for the bike paths?
Sure.
Correct.
One other recommendation that's outside of actually including it formally in the 2024 budget is seeing how the first 3 quarters go next year. And if we are under budget to a point that we could hire this person, coming back to this board with a formal budget amendment to get that person included. Kind of a creative way to, without having to directly impact the taxpayers.
I'm inclined to go that way.
Can you dumb this down for me a little bit? Why are the wages? Is that because the temp staff is here in October? What's caught? What am I looking at here?
So what you're looking at as somebody at $25 an hour, so as if they would have started October 1st. So that ends up being 7 pay periods. At a high level, that was estimated being 7 pay periods at $25 an hour times 80. And then you get to November, high level, 5 pay periods.
That's not a monthly spend. That's the.
Yep, that's what it would be for the rest of the year. Yep.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Just a little bit of background on conversations we had at committee about the need for this position. We have a lot of new amenities that we put in that require maintenance and closing down at the end of the year. Pickleball courts, bringing nets in. We have the Wheels Park, closing up all the shelters for the year. And right now, while we have seasonal work in the summer to help maintain things, this really does fall primarily on one person, which, as the workload increases, we want to make sure we can retain our employees because we're not overworking them and they are able to take time if needed, sick time, and we have someone to cover what is left behind. So just because of the timeline and shutting down things, that I would very much support the 10-1 start, but I understand the financial constraints we're in, and anytime we could bring someone in, I'm sure that they would be well used, even if that then pushes to 24. We look at kind of a mid-year budget to see if we can bring someone in earlier, but just reinforcing the need for this position.
And to be very clear, if we wouldn't hire it in any of these 3, my full recommendation would be a January 1, 2025 hire with direction that this is a priority from the board.
And Cameron, if we went with the October 1 start date, $9.11 impact, and we add that to the, whatever the number was, we're still less than what the Budget Review Committee approved, right, for the impact
Correct.
on the taxpayer.
Cameron, I think, just to reiterate, I think we go with your plan. Just come back to us midway through the year, and I think I'm with Heidi, but at the same point, I want to hedge my bets, I guess.
But does that include, but don't we have to put it in the budget for them to be able to do that?
I guess that's a good question.
So I guess I would ask for as part of the motion, just to come back to this board after the second quarter, summary, or the third quarter summary, for potential early hire of the park maintenance position. I would think that would be the best bet.
Did we get enough people to opt out of the health insurance to pay for this? How many, Cameron?
2? I think we're at 2.
So we didn't do well on that.
We
'cause
didn't
already
do
had
well. We
2.
saved. We ended up still saving money
Oh, we
on the
did?
net. Yep.
Okay. Not enough to pay for it, but okay.
The year's young. People still have time to opt out. I got my Inga on marketing it to employees. I'll go save you some more money. Don't you worry. And again, I can't stress, all joking aside, we do know this is a need for the Parks Department, and this was a cut that was really hard to make in the 11th hour. I think what ended up happening with the impact on the average home of 127 hours, or $127.39, along with the increase in the user fees for trash, was just really significant. So anything we could find to reduce that, at least for next year, is something we considered.
The other question I have on this, would you see a certain month being the best recruiting month for this type of position? I don't know if people are interested in I'd be in favor of even a 12/1, kind of once the snow season starts to help maintain those paths. But maybe January 1st just makes sense for most people to swap jobs.
I'll just say in this job market right now, I don't know if there's a good season. If you're recruiting, students right out of college, that's one thing. But otherwise, it's really just where everyone's life events are at this point.
Thanks.
And I think while I don't hope this, if we have vacancies and positions throughout the year, we could pull the trigger on this much sooner and kind of be like, we had X cost savings in the first quarter. Let's pull the trigger as of December 1st, hire date. I think this will be a very intentional try to get back into the budget as we can.
You have suggested wording on how we can word that, so you have, I think you have the guidance that's needed.
Yep,
Okay.
I have the guidance and what's been discussed to continue to investigate that. Sorry, it looked like Matt was going to talk.
No, I was just gonna say, I don't think anything further is needed. We're not looking to bind you to any future decision anyway. That would happen later if it's appropriate, so.
All right, now I will open it up into anything that hasn't already been discussed. Questions on the budget overall?
What's the trash dollar going to be on the?
It will be, so the user fee for trash next year will be $139.80 per unit.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're talking about, because that's a fixed unit, so we're talking about on an average home, that's about $267-ish. So that's significant.
When you say unit, you mean per
So-
receptacle?
Yeah, so if there's a house or parcel that has multiple, they get billed for every unit they have. And then after 4 units, it's that building's responsibility to contract directly with waste management. So 4 units and below will service, but we charge them for each set of receptacles that they would have.
So is it a flat fee per trash receptacle and recycling?
Correct.
Even though I
res-
only get recycling every other week?
Yep, so recycling is $64 in
Oh,
2020, or 22 cents, or an 89-cent increase from last year. So much more obviously reasonable from an increase perspective. But the trash being $139.80, that alone is bigger than the impact on the average
Wait,
tax home.
just so I can work my own math here in my own notes, so how much for a trash receptacle?
$139.80.
Yeah, and you can't opt out of that, right, Cameron?
You cannot opt out.
And then how much was the recycle bin?
$64.22. So kind of the question I get frequently is what would happen if we'd want recycling every year, double that number, or every week, double that number. So it'd be about $128.22,
So
44 cents.
So my number's coming out at $146.02, and that's what I pay monthly or annually
Annually.
for trash?
So trash is $139.80 plus the $64.22.
Wait, I did my math wrong, sorry.
So if we're
As
talking
an English
about like
major,
a
sorry.
monthly, and there is,
I guess, the other question I have too is like, am I paying this in my water and sewer bill, or where am I paying this?
and that actually came up today too. So one of the things that we may want to consider going forward is instead of having this as one payment on the tax bill, to include it on our quarterly or monthly utility bill. Currently, it's a special assessment or a special charge on your taxes. Pros and cons. Pro with having it on the tax bill is we turn over our special assessments and tax roll to the county, and they make collection efforts after January 31 for that tax cycle. They'll try to collect those for 10-ish years before ultimately writing it off. We've been very fortunate that none of our specials have gotten that old for garbage and recycling and specifically. Now, if you add it to the monthly utility bill, it's less of a hit up front. So it just kind of pro and con, however you want to look at it. It's the same overall.
What, from a staff perspective, what are you recommending?
So for me, in my specific situation, that paying that amount at one time isn't a big deal. However, for a resident that's on a fixed income, that might be more challenging. So I guess I wouldn't want to put my situation in every resident. I would say it's easier on staff not to add that to the monthly billing cycle. That would add a relatively significant amount of work, especially up front.
I would be concerned putting it on the utility bill from a renter landlord perspective as well. I mean, you're gonna put the burden on the renter, and they're probably not gonna get a corresponding decrease in their rent.
Good, great thing to consider.
Can we, do we have to know tonight?
No, that is something we couldn't even do for next year if we wanted to. It is something that we will just take a look at and continue to explore options, and so this body can make those decisions. I just did the quick math. This ends up being about garbage and recycling cost residents under this plan $17 a month. So to get, garbage coming in 4 times a month and recycling 2, the cost is $17 per month.
I would be really, and granted, we've always paid for, I mean, like you said, it was always on your tax bill. It was just a special assessment, but I'm really curious, because again, I'm hearing it more and more people want recycle every week. Is this, and to your point, I don't have to know about this tonight. Like, I don't have to make a decision. Is this I wonder if we take public comment and
so
revisit it just to, because like hearing the dollar amount, and again, I didn't ask and I didn't really do the homework right to figure out what it would cost, but like for that kind of cost to not have, I'd be willing to pay for recycling, and yes, I could call waste management, I could get another bin, but like that's one more spot in the garage I have to worry about my recycle bin, right? But so I'm spitballing here thinking like, can we?
So I would hold comment until we see so we're gonna have to go out for bid for this next year, and the cost is gonna skyrocket. You're gonna see probably a 50 to 75% increase to these numbers. So then to add weekly recycling on top of that is gonna be pretty significant. But if people really want it, certainly we can do that. But you're probably gonna hear from more residents that don't need it weekly.
Right.
And I think what we'd ultimately do is, because we are going out for bid, we'd present options to this board, and we can ultimately make a decision as a board.
Thank you.
Any other comments or just Chris?
Did we ever get a resolution or a decision on the library options? Option 1 or 2? Do we need to make a decision?
So if a decision isn't specifically made, they went with option number 1, and they increased their funding from 15,000, I think 750 to like 34,185. So if there's not any recommended change, and from hearing from Tracy and Cindy, didn't see like they were asking for anything else, then there wouldn't be a need for a motion.
Cool, thanks.
I just have an ask as we prepare to make a motion, if the crossing guard salary piece can be made separate, because I'll need to recuse myself from that part of the vote.
I was just gonna cover that.
Thank you, Jen.
I wrote it down even. Thanks, Sarah. I was gonna first say, is there any other items to discuss? And thank you, Cameron and staff.
I just wanted to make clear that the default is option 1 on the library at that funding level. Okay.
I saw a couple of numbers. There was one that was 30 and one that was 50, right? The 50 is the option 1, right? But 15 of that is a one-time capital expense, right?
Correct. So the first option that you saw was the 15,000 for Story Walk plus the 15,750, which is the 30,000, and then the Budget Review Committee recommended increasing it to match what the projected ending 2023 dollar amount is, with a small index for inflation. So that's where the difference is of the $2 amounts that you're looking at. So if there's not any more discussion, the current motion, based off of what I've heard, would be to approve the proposed budget with the modification of adding the parking lot at Village Hall for $135,000 and Bonnie Road at the salt shed for $50,000. And that's the only other modifications I have.
And setting aside the crossing guard portion for a second vote.
Yes.
So moved.
And I would second that motion.
All right, we have a motion and second then. Okay. And Lisa got that too, by the way. Any other discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Motion carries. Now we need a second thing, and Sarah's going to step out while we do that. And again, this is regarding the crossing guard increase in order to hopefully get more of those folks to join forces here. What?
My mic's on. I would make a motion to approve the changes in crossing guard pay as presented.
All right. Second. We have a motion second then regarding the crossing guards. Any other discussion? Having heard none, all those in favor then? Aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstain? Sarah abstains. And you can come back in. Motion carries. All right. Cameron, anything else on that?
Nothing else. Thank you all for.
All right. Super. With that, then we'll move to item 6, which is the village board. I'll make a motion. The village board goes into closed session regarding the compensation of various village employees. The Village of Cottage Grove Board will enter in a closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19.85, parentheses 1, parentheses C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee for which the public body has jurisdiction, exercise responsibility over.
Second.
All right, we have a motion second, and Lisa will do a roll call. Get fast.
Wittig. Williams.
Aye.
Valencia.
Aye.
Stoa.
Yes.
Peterson.
Aye.
Murphy. And Bollig.
Aye.
We are in closed session. Okay. Closed session to open. There are no.
Recording in progress.
I'll repeat that. We've reconvened back from into open session from closed. There's no items to consider from the closed session. Item 8.
Make a motion to adjourn. Second.
Wait a second. There's 3 in there, guys.
I make a motion to adjourn.
All right, Brittany. And was it Chris or David? David. That's what's getting written down. First, second, non-debatable. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.